Hello, welcome to VineyardKC West podcast. For more information, visit us at vineyardkcwest.com.
All right, we're in the last week of our Margin series, and so we're focused on taking back time from the margin monster. So a lot of times at the end of our weeks, we don't have time for the things that are most important. So we looked at overcoming crowded loneliness in week one, and then we looked at living by the life rhythm of Jesus, putting relationships first, and living by the Hebrew day planner, week two. Talked about rediscovering the value of the banquet or the feast and using the table as a tool for that in week three. And then the last week we focused on getting work done at work. So it talked about inviting Jesus and enjoying Jesus in our work and be more productive with that as well. And so what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at talking about kids, because we always have to remember that everything we're doing and how we deal with everything in life, we're passing on to the next generation. And so the way that we interact with time, we're training the next generation with that. Like there's ripple effects for whatever we do in the next generation with kids, with time. And 936, that's the number of weeks that a child has from their birth till they turn 18 and typically leave the home. 936. So my wife and I, we have three sons. They're 16, 14, and 12. Give or take months. So with my oldest son, we have 84 weeks left with him before he's 18. So 90% of his childhood is gone, right? My middle son, we have 158 weeks left. So 85% of his childhood is past. And then my youngest son, 266 weeks. So 70% of his childhood is past. And while we know that childhood is not everything, right? I think it's an unhealthy thing to say, well, once childhood is over, it's over, right? It's kind of like, hey, after the first year, the honeymoon's over with marriage. It's like, what of you? No, you're always a parent to your kids, but there's something special about that time, that 18 years. There's something that God intended, and so, but after 18, you switch more into like coach mode. Friend mode in those things with kids. And so I remember several moments throughout my kids when they were little. And I remember my mom, right? I was telling her and I'm trying to get my boys this, and she's all, let them be kids. Just let them be kids. And I'm like, Mom, I'm not raising boys, I'm raising men, And my mom was like, whatever, And what I said was true, but what she said was true too. And so it's kind of, as I go into this message, I look at it with time, and I know that I've been a good dad, that there's, good stuff. But I also know too that I didn't always practice this. And it's still a struggle to carve it out, what we're going to talk about today. But I also don't want to worship that 18 years, right? I don't want to make it like this, condemn myself for the 18 years. Because the reality is, I know that in my own life, I didn't listen to my parents until I was after 18. So you had these people that were trying to help me, but it took me until I got a little bit of, little bit of callus on my hands and everything else to now wait, what was I supposed to do again? And now I need help. And so we don't want to do that. We don't want to, and we definitely don't want something that anybody condemns themselves here if you've raised your children and they're done. But we all have children under the age of 18 in our lives, okay? They may be yours. They may be your grandchildren. They may be nieces or nephews, family, friends, neighbors, the children and the youth here at Vineyard that you pour into. Psalm 90, verse 12, is really particularly relevant for this. It says, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days. So in other words, pay attention to what's going on, to think, what is the end that I want for my children? What is like, where are we going? And then you backtrack, and then you say, that's where I want to go. And that's how you operate with the kids. And if you do that, then you gain a heart of wisdom of what to do this week and then the next week. Because that 936, part of me said to myself as I looked at my numbers with my boys, I'm like, gosh, I feel like such a failure. Like, I feel like, how many of those weeks did I do this? How many weeks did I do this? And then I said, but wait a minute. Wow, I've got 90 plus more with Wyatt, before he's 18 years old and goes off to college or whatever. That's awesome. Look at all that opportunity. So that's the heart of wisdom, where it's like when you number it, when you look at it, you can apply something today. But the hurdle for us is that life keeps happening, right? So even though you get like this verse, like, okay, I got it, I'm going to do that. Life comes at you, and then all of a sudden you forget. And the problem is that childhood is really an endangered species. Like me, my attitude with when my mom talked to me, she's like, let them be kids, let them, right? I'm like, no, I got to raise men. And the reality is if you look at the psychology of it, and you look at the science of it, and you look at what the Bible speaks of, yes, you raise your kids, but there's something that they need more than just like this structure to try to get them there. We typically, and this is in general, have our kids overscheduled, right? We're introducing them to that overcrowded loneliness that we talked about in week one, where it's just tons of schedule, where sometimes there's not really that meaningful relationship. There's a lack of balance and boundaries at an early age. The pressures of parenting are real. These are just some of the pressures. So the pressure to overschedule activities is that we think, well, that teaches them socialization, right? So they need to get around other kids to be able to do those things, do those. And, partly true, but there's this pressure like you have to do that. Organize activities to develop children in a particular way that will give them an edge over their peers or now or in the future. So in other words, I've got to get them doing this because so-and-so's doing this, and their kid's getting way ahead, and their kid can say 20 things of the alphabet, and my kid only can say 4 at this point. And so there's this pressure, and so we feel like we have to, or they know they're a purple belt in Taekwondo, and my kid only has his red stripes. They go through all this stuff, and you start thinking about that, which it doesn't really matter. Like, close your eyes, okay? Think of like your 20-year reunion. And think about the people, right? It didn't turn out the way you thought it was, did it, right? It's all over the scale. Things shift. Kids will talk about popular today. Well, who's popular? Or who's this? And this person has this. And so there's a whole lot of effort, like in competition or trying to keep up with everybody else or what you're supposed to do. I know Michelle and I, when we did premarital and then we're getting ready to have kids, we read every book we could find. And in marriage and with kids, we found that there's a whole lot of information, but it's kind of like you kind of do all this, and then you're on your own, right? Even I remember when Wyatt was being born, we walked through this thing. We took all these classes and all sorts of stuff, and we did every possible class you could do, and then it was like, okay, here when the baby's ready to come, the contractions are going to be like this, and nothing was that way. It was like her contractions were like super intense, like 1 minute apart for like all these hours. We're like, well, it must not be this because it's this. And then it's like, oh, we need to go, right? And so nothing turned out that way. And so you can prepare and prepare and prepare, and you just have to do it the way you're supposed to. So we really have to ask a question, right? We have to ask this question of each kid. Like, is this really what my child really wants or needs? Right? Like I have this mindset that this is how I was raised, or they need to do this or do this thing or have this thing. But like, who is this person? Right? You may have heard a story of this professor or teacher that taught young children, and in the culture, it was not common for those that are older and more esteemed to show great respect to the kids. But he would walk up and he would bow to the kids. And they said, well, why do you do that? I mean, they're just kids. And he says, because I have no idea who it is that I stand before. Right? Like we have, like, we don't know who these people are, and yet we're entrusted with them in our lives. And so we have to really consider that. We have to think about what the Bible says about this, right? Remembering this, what we just read? Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Like, I had the same idea that all my boys would be the same. Like, I don't know why. I have these weird things. I'm just like, well, they just all be the same. And they are so different, absolutely so different. And the way they communicate, the way that they approach things, the way that they hear things. And so you really have to keep on your toes to be able to find out, who is this person really? And so the Bible teaches us, how to begin with the end in mind. It speaks to us about this. So the first thing that we know is that God designed children to leave their parents' house at some point. Okay? It's absolutely designed that way. In other societies, right, you have more agrarian cultures where they were farmers, and you say, what about that? Well, it was still that they would have their family, and that they would add an addition. I know in Amish and other cultures, they will add an addition. You have a family, you add an addition. Still, the point is that things change, okay? And so this verse says that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Now, not everyone gets married, but God did design it that at some point these kids will leave. I know for me, I don't know if you remember when you left your parents' home. I know for me, I just couldn't wait to go. So, and also too, my dad moved away. So as soon as I graduated high school, so it was just like I was just out. I moved in with my brother. We got an apartment, and it was a little bit like we were kids again. There was a little bit of that, and fights and different things. But it was just like I was out on my own, and I made all sorts of mistakes, and still doing whatever else. But it's like you don't get that. It's kind of like you can read all the books about these things, but until you're the bottom line, you need that. So we have to realize that I was partly right with my mom. Hey, I'm raising men, because they're supposed to leave. The next thing that we see is that God designed children with a unique calling. So Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go. And so obviously this speaks, it's a, very, man-focused society as far as the head, but it obviously applies to men and women. So train up a child in the way that he or she should go. Even when he or she was old, they will not depart from it. So what this speaks of is it really speaks of that God has a unique life calling for each kid. I heard one speaker say, and this is when my kids were little, that he would start with his kids when they were young, and he would just tell them, he'd say, God has something really special for you. And I'll still tell them that. And because I'm like, I like that. And it's not the thing of like, hey, you're a snowflake and there's no, right? You're a unicorn and, you poop rainbows, and like, we don't want to go there, right? But the reality is that we want them to know that when it comes to God, he uniquely made you for something special. And I tell them now, it's like, yeah, Dad, yes, Dad, yes, Dad, okay? But when they were little, I'd say, did you know something? God made you for something special. And they would say, really? What? Like, I don't know. But, it's like, but ask him, you can find out. And so it was kind of that thing. But when it says train up a child in the way that he should go or she should go, it's like it speaks of translated like they're bent, like the way that they're bent, the way that they're formed. And there's something very specific about the way God made somebody, and we're to find that. And sometimes the things that we're pushing on with our kids and like battling them on, we're not doing right because we're trying to fit them into this mold when actually they're not supposed to fit into that mold. They're not supposed to go into that thing. The reason that they're doing that is because they have this way about them. They think differently about them. And so we have to really respect that. Like when I was in high school, I had this friend that her dad rented Corvettes. And so every once in a while I would go with him to pick up Corvettes from these customers and drive back. And I'll tell you what, I did push the limit on the speed on that thing sometimes. But I was like, wow, I'm going to really respect this. This isn't mine. And I definitely didn't rent it. And I think we need to see that with young people. That we can become too familiar with them and to think that they're just ours. They are ours, but they're really God's. We really want to respect him and respect his design. And then the next thing is that God designed the parental role in the life of the child. So fathers and mothers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And so the idea here is that you can deal with your kids in such a way that you cause something in them. Like this is where, you end up in counseling, which most of us do. It's okay. Come on in, the water's fine, right? I had this whole thing. I said to myself, I'm not going to mess up my kids. I'm not going to mess up my kids, and now I'm saving to help them with counseling, right? Because you just don't know. You're like, well, I'm not going to do this that my parents did, or I'm not going to do this that, that would really mess with somebody, or that sort of thing. But then all of a sudden, you do other things because you don't see right, and they're not even bad things, but they just affect them in certain ways. Because they're aliens? Yeah, that's right. Okay? And so, but this speaks specifically, though, about not like unintentional things, like the things I'm talking about, but it's like talking about being like harsh, right? And like what I was talking about, like forcing them into a mold, being harsh with them. That's where you end up with mommy and daddy issues, where, I know for me, I've talked about it a little bit, like when my parents divorced, they were like sorting through their stuff, and then I was very much independent, still am. And it was kind of like they thought, well, Cody doesn't need us. And so what I developed all the way till, my late 30s, like I didn't really figure this out. Like I had like a real spirit of abandonment, like in my life, and it affected my relationships. It affected my marriage. It affected my friendships. It affected the way that I led as a leader, all sorts of things. Until God like peeled back the layers, and there was this day that like, I'm like, wow. And then I was, I recognized it, I'm set free from that. But parents can do some pretty gnarly stuff. They didn't mean to do that, but that's like, it affected me greatly. And so we can do that with our kids. What's great is if they're under 18 or older, you can still deal with it. You can still come to that. What I did is I ended up having a conversation with my parents, and I said, hey, because I never said anything to them. When they divorced, I just said, okay, cool, going with the program. But what I did is I just said, I followed up. So at 39 years old, right, called my mom on the side of the road, like, hey, listen, I need to tell you. When I felt this. And I didn't know. Like, I felt like a little kid, like I was going to get, like, yelled at or whatever, or feel, that sort of thing. And then it was like, wow, we had this amazing conversation. It transformed our relationship. It really has to this day. And then talking to my dad, and it's like, hey, here's this. And then it was like, hey, when, after we divorced and you were here, like you really needed me, but I was doing my own thing. And so you see that, and I mean, right? So the reason I'm sharing that story is I'm just trying to be transparent with you, that because I realize that a lot of us in here, you may not have your kids in the home anymore, and you're processing some things from that time. And I just want to let you know that God goes backwards. Like, don't be condemned to think that, like, gosh, Cody, that 18 years, I totally blew it, and now there's this. No, he loves to heal, like all the time. He did it in my life. And I'm a different dad now, too, because of that healing that took place as an adult. So go backwards, whether your kids are in the home or not. All right, and the next thing is God designed you to lead your children into a relationship with God. So in Deuteronomy, it says, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. And so the picture we see here is that our faith in Jesus, like we were designed to lead our kids into a relationship with God. We bring our kids to church, and other people teach them in class, in the youth class, in the kids class, and that's the whole focus. Is like we want them to recognize who Jesus is, and we want to connect them who they are here. But here's the thing. If your kids don't see a connection to God in real life, then they only see it as a place. Or they only see it like God's here, but not at home or not at school. And so the idea here is about tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads and these things, is that the gospel, the good news of Jesus and who God is and what it means to follow him is integrated into just your everyday life. So situations come up and you share what Jesus thought about you. Jesus is doing something in your heart and your mind. You share that with your kids. There's somebody in need, so you love them and serve them. And we've done that with our kids, since they were little. And like when we planted a church in Central California, we walked the neighborhoods around where the school is where we met, and we handed out gum. And so one of my sons, he thinks that when you plant a church, all you have to do is hand out gum. It's like, he's talked to people like pastors and stuff like, look, all you got to do is hand out gum. Here's the deal. Let me just tell you. So, another one of my sons, there was this homeless gentleman sitting there, and he was sitting near a pizza shop. And I said, perfect, you guys, we should go. He's sitting outside this pizza shop. Let's buy him a pizza, because the connection, right? This is just not planned, but like, let's show that like Jesus is still meeting people's needs, and let's have him be a part of it. So went up to this guy and talked to him. Hey, what do you need? And that kind of stuff. And I said, I'm Cody. This is my son. And, what's your name? And he goes, I'm Spider-Man. And so my kid not only got to be the hands and feet of Jesus, but he goes back to the car where the rest of our boys were, and then my wife, and like, that's awesome, you guys. You got him a pizza, and my son, young enough at the time, he goes, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Not only did we get to partner with Jesus, but I met Spider-Man, right? And so there's this adventure that takes place when you go forward, and I think that Jesus just really smiles at that. So, all right, so what do we do with this? Like how do we take this home? Like I said, we're at different places. Some of you interact with, it's kids in the neighborhood or kids here at the church, or you've got kids in the home that are under 18. But how do you interact? How do you apply this in your life? Number one is let the kids play, right? We've talked to you some about what we do here on Friday nights for the home football games for the high school students. It's not a program. What we've done is we just set up basically a playground. And so the kids come here, and I think they sent out scouts the first few weeks. They're like, what is this? What are they going to do? And it's like, wait. And then some of them came back and said, so wait, they feed you? And they didn't ask for money? Okay, cool, check. Okay. Did the guy get you up there and no? Okay, cool, check. And wait, they have s'mores and a bonfire too. And so we just set up this place, and they gather all over this place. And that's what they do, is they just play. Like, we don't have to tell them anything. It's not structured. The only thing that's structured is we're going to feed you. You have a place that's yours for you to be with your people. You get to be yourself. And so some camp out around the fire. Some play basketball out here. And some of the adults play, Greg, and gets in there and plays with them. And then some hang out in the youth room. Some, last time it was great. A couple of them brought their guitars and stuff and just jammed. And it's just like, that's what we're talking about with kids. They need unstructured time where it's just like, just sit back and just say, what are we doing? What do you want to do? We're just hanging out. And then when you do that, the imaginations come up, and the leadership gifts come up, and play comes up. Like for me, I grew up on 16 acres in Central California, and we would, some days, my parents would be at work during the summer, and my brother and I, like 8, 9 years old, we'd pack up our backpacks and our pocket knives and everything that we could, and we're just going on an adventure. We just go out and do it. And looking back, I'm like, what were we doing? But on one hand, though, it created something in me, just an adventure and an ability to think and be creative and play in those things. So you create space for play. That's all you have to do. Kids these days, if you're super structured with them and you don't allow for that, and everything's just, then they're going to need help. like really? Yeah, just, I don't know, let's do this or that. And the way you help them get set free is you play too. You hop in. We have family breakfast on Saturday mornings because we're just super busy. And so we sat around and I said, hey, so how are we doing as a family? And pretty good. These things are good. But, one boy said, we're just so busy. Like, yeah, absolutely. We're just so busy. And it's like, so what can we do? And they're like, well, this is good. Okay. And what are some other things that we can do to, like, we need to slow down. And, and we came up with these 5 things. None of the things were like, well, teach me this or, unless it was something that like they were really interested in that I knew, but it was just like play. Well, let's, we haven't played knockout on the basketball hoop as much lately. So we play Madden, that's good. Well, we're going to play a card game. So we said, okay, in this next week, we're going to do these 5 things. And they all just had to do with play. Like that's what they desire. They desire those things. So what we can do though, because really ultimately as adults, you guys, it comes down to this, is if you think of children and who they are, and then you think of the pressures of life and the things that come against us and all the things and what we think we're supposed to do with kids and all this stuff, it really comes down to our relationship with Jesus that really affects them, whoever the kids are in your life. And I experienced this as a teenager. For me, my family system, and some of it was me looking back, right? Because I'm like, I don't need anybody. I'm going to do my thing. My parents tried, but what made me realize what it meant to be a child, what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be healthy, all these things came from families that I met that were Christians when I came to know Jesus. And that's because they were connected to Jesus, because they understood this concept. And so Matthew 19:14, it says, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. So this is the context. They're at this place, and then parents brought children to be blessed by Jesus, for him to put a hand on them and bless them. And the disciples, like good disciples, okay, they make us realize, like, hey, we're not that bad. Like, they didn't get it. They're like, get them out of here. Just no children. Like you ever gone to a concert and you try to get to your seat and somebody else is in your seat, or they tell you, nope, that ticket isn't good. And it's kind of like that, like, get out of here. Jesus doesn't have time for the children. But Jesus reframes things for them, and he's just like, no, let them come to me. And so think of the heart of Jesus. Like, think of how you image Jesus today. Like, if your neighbor has a party, that's maybe keeping you up. It's like, I don't know if you're supposed to be quiet after 10 or whatever, or maybe your neighbor is the crazy one that's setting off like all the fireworks on 4th of July, just like, it's like they've got the mortars and go, Let me ask you a question. What would Jesus be doing? Your image of him. He'd be over there, right? He'd be setting that off and doing that. Yes, you do see this Jesus that is intense about relationship with God and intense about not hurting people and those things. But Jesus probably because he was fully alive. Jesus was really the only person that's ever lived that's been truly human. And so Jesus is like, let little children come to me. And when people hang out with Jesus, they're changed. They play. They enjoy life. I know my relationship changed with Jesus forever when I was driving my car on a road I'd been through many times, and I had this song. It wasn't a Christian song or anything. It was just this fun song. And I was just kind of, singing along and moving around in my car and stuff. And then all of a sudden, I got this image of like Jesus dancing. And I'm thinking to myself, like, whatever. And so this is what I hear, like in my inner person, like from God. It's like, what? You don't think I dance? And I realized that I had this picture of God, like this stern, hey, keep it a distance. Don't mess things up. Keep it all straight. And I was changed. I'm like, wow. And I realized that, and then I started reading Jesus differently. I looked, I'm like, oh, like the religious people were the ones that said, like, they called him like a drunkard. Why? And they called him a sinner. Jesus, who didn't sin at all. He was perfectly God, perfectly man. They called him a drunkard and a sinner. Why? Because he was always at parties. Or the equivalent of he was spending time with people where they were at, having fun, having life, joy rising up. And so as we get to know Jesus better, then we'll be different with kids. And we can play with Jesus. Like, what would he do? How would he do things? And then the next thing is playing with the Holy Spirit. So this verse, 2 Corinthians 3:17 says, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And so the idea here with where it says freedom, like we like to take this, like, woo! Let's bounce off the walls. And it can be applied that way, like there's freedom, but what it means is the word there, freedom, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, is this saying that there's no trappings whatsoever of having to try to like be good or like following this strict system, like, oh, gotta keep it tight. Like me, Mabel, get your Ables off the table. You know what my grandmother would say to me at the table, and just like, oh, button it up. There's just a freedom, like you're not having to focus on trying to keep it right. Trying to do like dead religion, like trying to just do this thing. If I mess up, it's terrible, like a checklist. Like it's just, so when you come into touch with the Holy Spirit, that's the result, is there's freedom. That's why Jesus was so free, is because the religious people are like, well, hey, you got to tighten it up, and you can't do that, and you can't do this, and you can't do these things. And Jesus is like, I don't worry about doing those things. That's what it means, is you're not even worried about it. You see, religion would tell us that we're supposed to like manage our sin. You can't do this and you can't do that. But Jesus showed us a totally different way to live. And as we get that way, as we're filled with the Holy Spirit, right? As we're open to the Holy Spirit in our lives, then we approach the kids in our lives differently too. We're able to play with him and play with them. And so, you may want to write down, like what you heard. Because, all of these messages are important on time, but this one, when it has to do with people, so important. Because, like, we get it wrong, like we're coming up on Christmas, right? Like everybody says, well, kids want presents. Yeah, but they want presents, right? Yeah. They want presents. That's it. And I know it's you may have heard that before or whatever. I didn't make it up, but it's just so true. Like as kids really get down to it, what would you really want? What present would you really want? Time. I want time. And it gets harder, you guys, if you have teenagers in here, because if you get teenagers, then you're insecure because you're like, who are you? And what's going on? And then they're like, who are you? What's going on? I was a youth pastor in my early 20s. And parents used to come to me and ask me advice on parenting their teenagers. And I look back, I'm like, what were they thinking? Now that I have teenagers, I would tell them things like, well, you just need to listen to them. And I'm like, listen to them? Sometimes it's just all I can do to like somehow escape out the window. I'm like, Michelle, we need to get out of the house or they're going to consume us. Just slowly sneak out, right? And so there's barriers there. You look at that, like, what do I do? What do I do with these people? So write down, like, what you heard. And the first thing, and there's some questions on there always, like, what did you hear and what will you do? What will you change? Because it's like stepping on the scale, right? Like if you're trying to lose weight, you look at the scale and you feel good about it or you don't, right? Here's the thing, though. That's what they call that a lagging indicator. Okay? Use it for business, use it for all kinds of stuff. So if I step on the scale and I look at it, that's a lagging indicator. In other words, it's what I've done up to this point. But the better indication of like where my health is headed physically is a leading indicator, which is how will I eat today? What will I do today? And so now apply that to the kids in your lives. Apply that to the young ones under 18 in your life or your kids. If all your kids are gone and you're like, well, I heard today I need to ask forgiveness of my son, my daughter. Or I need to forgive them. Right? Because you look today and say, hey, it's all messed up. Because I looked at that, you guys. As I looked through this, I said, you know what? In a lot of ways, I've repeated things like I'm too focused, I'm working too hard, I'm going after things. And those things, the impact they've had are good, but nowhere near the impact if I had spent more time here with the boys doing this. And so I look at it, but that's just me stepping on the scale. So now what I can do is say, well, what am I going to do today? How am I going to change it today? And it's the best investment you can make. Best investment of your time forever. It's amazing how when you invest your time in the things that are most important, how the other stuff works out. Because that's what they remember, is they remember the time spent. I look at my parents, I'm like, I can tell you events and time when it's like, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to go do this? Hey, let's do this. And so it is for the ones that we're around too. So let's pray. Let's, as we close, as we're praying, let's do a little business with God, okay? So whoever you thought of, right, whatever child you thought of in your life, as we've been walking through this today, I want you to pray for them, or maybe it's several. But just spend a minute here between you and God and just pray for them. And if there's barriers like forgiveness that need to happen, then bring those before God. And if there is problems, do this. Ask him to intervene in the relationship.
Thanks for listening this week. If you're looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, please visit vineyardkcwest.com.